You know that feeling, right? Just the constant buzz, the notifications, everything demanding your attention.
Oh, yeah. Information overload. It's relentless.
Exactly. And trying to find some quiet, some connection, or just feel actually present, it feels almost impossible sometimes.
Yeah.
How do you even cut through all that noise?
It's such a modern problem, isn't it?
Hmm.
But that search for peace, for something deeper, that's timeless. We often look outside ourselves, which, can just add more complexity.
Which is exactly why we're doing this deep dive.
Yeah.
It's designed just for you, the listener, based on these specific sources you wanted us to explore.
And our subject today offers a really striking perspective on this. We're looking at Brother Lawrence, 17th century,
Right.
and his incredibly simple way of living in this constant kind of loving awareness of God. It's often called the practice of the presence of God.
Simple, you say. That sounds promising already.
It really is. What's amazing is how practical and accessible his whole approach feels even now.
So where are we getting this information? It's not like he sat down and wrote a big instruction manual, right?
No, not at all. The sources we have are actually quite small. It's a collection of conversations people had with him recorded by a guy named Joseph de Beaufort, and then some letters Brother Lawrence wrote himself, mostly later in his life.
Ah, okay. So recorded conversations and personal letters.
Exactly. And they were put together after he died. He wasn't trying to publish some big theological work. He was just living it. And these are snapshots, really, of that life and his thoughts on it.
Got it. So our mission here for you is to dive into these accounts. We want to unpack Brother Lawrence's own story, get to the heart of his practice, and really pull out the key insights.
Yeah, the goal is to give you a clear, concise understanding of this way of life, and maybe offer a different angle on finding that peace, that presence in your own life today.
Okay, let's start with who he was. Before he was Brother Lawrence, he was Nicholas Herman.
Nicholas Herman, that's right. Born in Lorraine, France, around 1610.
And his early life wasn't exactly quiet or monastic, was it? He was a soldier.
Yes, a soldier in the 30 Years' War. A really brutal conflict.
Wow.
And that experience left a mark. He got a permanent injury, some kind of sciatic nerve problem that left him, well, pretty crippled and in chronic pain for the rest of his life.
So constant physical pain was just part of his reality.
It seems so. The sources say we don't have tons of detail out his really early life, but he was educated, apparently well-read, and seemed drawn to spiritual things pretty young.
Hmm.
There's even a mention of him spending some time living out in the wilderness, kind of like the old desert fathers.
Interesting. So that inner searching was there early on?
Seems like it. And before the monastery, he also worked as a civil servant. He had this really self-deprecating view of himself then, called himself a footman who was clumsy and broke everything.
Huh. That does paint a picture. Soldier, injured veteran, wilderness seeker, clumsy footman. Yeah. It's not the smooth path to sainthood, you might imagine.
Not at all. And then, middle-aged, he decides to enter a monastery. A fairly new one in Paris.
Okay.
And his reason for joining, it's pretty striking. He basically expected it to be hard. He thought he'd face hardship, maybe punishment for his past faults, his clumsiness. And he wanted to offer that up as a sacrifice to God.
He went in looking for difficulty.
Yeah, anticipating penance, maybe suffering. But then the surprise,
What happened?
he said God completely turned it around on him. Instead of the hardship he expected, he found nothing but satisfaction there.
Wow. Okay, so he finds unexpected contentment, but that doesn't mean it was all smooth sailing from then on, spiritually speaking. The sources mention struggles, right? Especially early on.
Oh, definitely. Despite that initial, perhaps surprising satisfaction, the first decade inside the monastery was tough. Full of severe trials and challenges, is how it's described. His later peace took time.
What kind of trials? What was he wrestling with?
Well, the biggest thing sounds like this intense inner torment. He had this deep, deep conviction that he was damned.
Damned, like going to hell.
Yes. And it wasn't just a passing doubt. It apparently lasted for 4 years. 4 years of agony believing that. He said all the men in the world could not have persuaded him to the contrary.
4 years. I can't even imagine. That sounds utterly crushing.
It really does. And he felt completely alone in it. His words were something like, all creatures, reason, and God himself were against me and faith alone for me. Like the whole universe was stacked against him except for this tiny flicker of faith.
That isolation sounds incredibly heavy. Did this affect his prayer life too? Was that difficult?
Very much so. He was quite open about it. Said his official prayer times were often just a battle with wandering thoughts. He'd spend the whole time trying to focus, failing, getting distracted again. He admitted he could never regulate his devotion by certain methods, the way some others could.
So those structured prayer techniques just didn't click for him then.
No, not easily. And on top of all that, this heavy sense of unworthiness, guilt over past sins, feeling overwhelmed by what he saw as God's great unmerited favors. He even doubted his own experiences, wondering if they were real or just, willful delusion, his imagination running wild.
Wow. That's a lot to carry. Doubt, guilt, fear, struggles with prayer. It really shows that the peace he found later was hard-won.
Absolutely. It wasn't just handed to him. And the breakthrough, the turning point, actually came right out of that pit of despair. While he was tormented by this fear of damnation,
Yeah.
he made this incredibly bold decision, a resolution.
What was it?
He decided, okay, no matter what happens, saved or damned, it doesn't matter. He would continue to act purely for the love of God. Just keep loving God, keep serving God, because that's all he could do. If he was going to bow Lord's anyway, at least he'd spend his life loving God.
That's incredibly radical. Giving up the outcome entirely, just focusing on love.
Totally. And the effect, he said, from that exact moment, that decision point, he lived in perfect liberty and continual joy.
Just like that.
Apparently so. The motivation shifted completely. It wasn't about reward or punishment anymore. It was just pure love for God. That resolution changed everything.
Okay, so that's the breakthrough. Rooted in this idea of a pure love.
Mm-hmm.
How did that actually play out day to day? What was this practice he developed?
At its core, it's surprisingly simple. It's about fostering this constant sense of God's presence
Okay.
by continually conversing with him.
Continually. You mean not just at set prayer times?
Exactly. That's the key difference. He talked about speaking to him frankly and plainly, just talking to God about whatever was happening, asking for help with daily stuff just as they happen, incorporating God into, everything.
Like you just chatting with a companion who's always there.
Pretty much. And he said the biggest obstacle was useless thoughts.
Yeah.
Random distractions that spoil all. His advice, gently push them away as soon as you notice them and just turn back to that inner conversation, that awareness of God.
That sounds simple, but also hard to maintain. All the time.
He knew it took effort, especially at first. But yes, the aim was all the time, every hour, every minute, even, he said, in the height of my work. He found that this constant turning towards God helped him avoid doing wrong, and it built this feeling of holy freedom and real familiarity with God.
Right, yeah.
And his point was, through repetition, just keep doing it, it becomes habitual. That sense of God's presence starts to feel quite natural.
So it's a skill you build through practice, like muscle memory.
Yeah.
How did he actually do this while, say, working? What does it look like in action?
Yeah, the sources give us some really good down-to-earth examples. He spent 15 years as the monastery cook.
The cook, after
Yeah.
calling himself clumsy.
I know, right? And he admitted he had a great aversion to the job initially. He didn't like it.
I can imagine. That sounds stressful.
Totally. But he said by consciously deciding to do everything in the kitchen for the love of God and constantly asking for grace to stay present, the whole experience changed. The work actually became very easy for him.
Just changing the reason he was doing it transformed the feeling of it. That's powerful.
Isn't it? And there's another great story. He got sent to Burgundy to buy wine for the monastery.
Okay.
He called it a very unwelcome task. Remember, he was lame, in pain, and he said he had zero business sense. He even describes having to sort of roll himself over the barrels to get around.
Oh my goodness. A limping monk rolling over wine barrels trying to make a deal. That sounds awful.
It sounds like a comedy sketch. But he said it wasn't anxious. He just told God, basically, okay, this is your business, you handle it. Complete trust. And he found the trip perfectly, very well performed, just like a similar unwelcome trip the year before.
Wow. So even things he hated or felt totally incompetent at became ways to practice trust and presence? He worked repairing sandals later, too.
Yes, after the kitchen. The point is, his practice wasn't about doing spiritual things. It was about how he did everything. That's why he could say his set prayer times were not different from other times.
That really turns things upside down, doesn't it? We usually separate God time from work time or chore time.
But for him, he could feel God's presence in as great tranquility amid the noise and clutter of my kitchen as he could kneeling at the Blessed Supper. The external setting didn't matter as much as the internal focus.
So how did he manage that internal focus during a busy job like cooking? What was the method?
It was a simple cycle, really. Before starting something, offer to God, ask for help to stay present. While doing it, keep up that quiet, familiar chat with God. Afterwards, say thanks. Or if he felt he'd messed up or gotten distracted.
Which must have happened, right?
Oh, sure. If that happened, he'd quietly ask for pardon. But then, and this is key, without being discouraged, he set his mind right again. He just went straight back to the practice, as if he had never deviated.
That without being discouraged bit feels crucial. It wasn't about never failing, but always returning.
Exactly. It's the persistence in turning back. And he really stressed that God regards not the greatness of the work, but the love with which it is performed. Doing tiny, ordinary things for the love of God was what counted.
Okay, that gives a really clear picture of the practice in action. Let's dig into some of the underlying beliefs that come through in his words. What are the core principles here?
Yeah, several things really stand out. First, faith. It's the bedrock. He'd say, faith alone was enough for me, and that it's sufficient to bring us to a high degree of perfection. He wasn't relying on complicated arguments, but on the simple lights of faith.
Just basic trust.
Right. And then absolutely central is love. He saw love as the ultimate goal, the end, while other spiritual exercises were just the means to get there. He thought the shortest way to God was simply a continual exercise of love and doing all things for his sake.
Pure love.
Pure love. Seeking only God, not even the good feelings or gifts God might give. And he found that love makes even difficult things, pains, feel sweet.
Love is the driver. Makes sense after his breakthrough.
Totally. Then there's resignation, which sounds passive, but for him meant this active, complete surrender to whatever God wills, in everything, good times and bad. He felt that whether things were going well or badly, it was all the same to a soul truly resigned. When things got tough, the answer was just another complete act of resignation, putting your whole trust in God, knowing he would not deceive us.
Just handing it all over, trusting the outcome.
Exactly. And linked to that is humility. He had this really clear-eyed view of himself, acknowledging his faults, flaws, and weaknesses, calling himself wretched, knowing he couldn't do good on his own. He'd confess his failings honestly, without excuses, but also without getting bogged down, just trusting in God's mercy. He even saw his own troubles as deserved, in a way.
Honest self-assessment, but grounded in mercy.
Right, not despair. And a huge insight was about God's presence, this conviction that God is right here, intimately present with us, nearer to us than we are aware, actually within us.
Not far away.
Not at all, which means you don't need a special place. Your own heart can be an oratory, a place of prayer.
God is always accessible.
Always. He also differentiated between the will and the intellect. For him, acts of the will, choosing to love, trust, turn to God, these were all important. Thinking complicated thoughts, intellectual stuff, comparatively of little value.
It's about the heart's intention, not
Yeah.
the mind's complexity.
That's it. And his view on pardon or forgiveness, simple. Expect it without anxiety, based purely from the blood of Jesus Christ only, combined with owning your own faults.
Grace, essentially.
Pure grace. And maybe the most countercultural thing is his take on suffering and difficulties. He didn't just endure them, he saw them as proof of God's love, as tools God uses for salvation, as chances to lean entirely on God. He even said they could become sources of sweetness and consolation if you accept them as from God.
Wow.
Suffering with God, he said, was like paradise. His own chronic pain, he felt it purified him, forced him to stay close to God.
That's a radical reframing of pain, seeing it as a pathway almost.
It really is. And underpinning all of this is God's grace. He was absolutely convinced God never failed offering us his grace at each action, that God gives strength more than sufficient for whatever we face. Grace flows freely to a soul with lively faith. His bottom line was, we can do all things with the grace of God, and without which we can do nothing but sin.
So it's not about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. It's about leaning into that divine help constantly. Okay, so what did it feel like for him living this way? You mentioned the perfect liberty and continual joy, but can we get more specific about his inner world?
He describes this constant sort of inward excitement, not jittery, but like a deep vitality, a sense that God was strengthening him, making things easy, a profound inward peace, yes, but also active, continual joy and delight.
So much joy he had to hide it sometimes.
That's what he said. He was sometimes forced to find ways to hide their appearing outwardly because the inner joy was just so overwhelming he thought people might find it odd. He felt his soul was settled in its center and place of rest. He talked about an inexpressible sweetness, like being held in the bosom of God.
That sounds incredibly profound, like a deep, abiding intimacy.
It really does.
Yeah.
And then there's that recurring, slightly shocking insight. He felt more united to God in his outward employments than when he left them for devotion and retirement.
Right, back to the kitchen again. Closer to God washing dishes than in formal prayer. That really challenges how we think about spiritual practice.
It absolutely does. It suggests the connection is internal, portable, not tied to specific activities or locations. He also mentioned how when his mind did wander, God would gently pull him back. Not harshly, but maybe with a little lift in his heart, a meek and fond regard, or simple, quiet words like, "My God, here I am."
Like a gentle nudge.
Exactly. And he spoke with such conviction about God's presence inside him. A certainty, he called it, always in the innermost part of his soul, completely beyond doubting. It wasn't just belief anymore, it was a lived fact for him. Near the end, he even said something like, "I believe no more, but I see, I feel what faith teaches us."
From faith to direct knowing. Wow. Okay, now, for someone listening to this, maybe you, thinking, okay, this sounds amazing, but also really hard to actually do consistently. What did Brother Lawrence say about the difficulties? How did he advise approaching it?
He was very realistic. He flat out said the beginning is very difficult because you have to start purely on faith, often without immediate feelings or results, and those wandering thoughts. He knew they were a huge issue. He battled them himself for years, remember?
Right.
His advice was, the will is mistress. You have to consciously but gently keep recalling your mind to God. Do it with tranquility, he stressed. Don't get upset or frustrated with yourself.
So kindness towards yourself in the process is key. No beating yourself up for distractions.
Definitely. And perseverance. Just keep at it, even when it feels hard or tedious or like a waste of time, which it might initially. He also warned against getting too hung up on certain rules or particular forms of devotion. It's not about rigidly following a method. It's about the inner attitude, faith, love, humility.
So focus on the heart of it, not just the mechanics.
Exactly. The intention of the will. He did say you need to be willing to let go of distractions, even little pleasures, to empty the heart of all other things, because God wants that focused attention. He will possess the heart alone. It requires that whole trust and total surrender.
Okay.
But, and this is so important, don't get discouraged by failures. He learned, he said, by rising after my falls and by frequently renewed acts of faith and love. It's the getting back up that makes it become natural over time.
It sounds much more like a gentle, persistent returning than achieving some state of perfection.
That's a perfect way to describe it. And always remembering that baseline. We can do all things with the grace of God. You're not expected to do it purely on your own strength.
What kind of advice did he give directly to people who asked about this? How did he share it?
He earnestly recommended it to basically everyone. He just felt it was so beneficial, this walking in the presence of God. But apparently his most convincing argument wasn't words, it was him, his example. People saw it on his face, his countenance was edifying, showing that peace and calm devotion.
Living proof.
Exactly. But he did talk about it. He'd advise all the world to do it, calling it necessary for a spiritual life, but also surprisingly easy too. He encouraged people to start with a decision, a holy and firm resolution, never more to forget him. Just commit to trying to live the rest of your life in God's presence.
Make that conscious choice to begin.
Yes. And he made it sound very doable. God doesn't demand huge things, he said, just a little remembrance of him from time to time, a little adoration. He even used the example of a soldier on duty.
Right. The soldier.
Yeah, even one act of inward worship, though upon a march with sword in hand, is totally fine. Just thinking of God often, especially when things are tough or dangerous.
That makes it feel possible for literally anyone, anywhere. A quick glance of the heart towards God.
Absolutely. He called it a glorious work, even our profession as Christians, the main thing we should be doing. And if you don't know how, we must learn it. He also made this interesting point about perfection.
Yeah.
He said, the greatest perfection a soul aspires after, the more dependent it is upon divine grace. So the more you want to grow closer to God, the more you realize you need his help, not less.
So feeling like you need help is actually a sign you're on the right track.
Kinda, yeah. It fits perfectly.
Okay, let's circle back to where we started. That feeling of being overwhelmed, the noise, the busyness of modern life. How does this 300-year-old practice really speak to us, to you today?
I think it offers this incredibly powerful counter approach. It's not about adding another thing to your to-do list. It's about changing your inner focus during the things you're already doing. It cuts through all the external chaos by anchoring you in something internal, constant, that sense of presence.
So instead of seeking novelty outside, you find the aha moments within the ordinary stuff you're already dealing with.
Exactly. It's a way to find peace, find presence literally anywhere, anytime. Doesn't matter what your job is, how busy you are, whether you think you're spiritual or not. It makes the mundane sacred just by changing the why and the awareness.
And it feels like a real antidote to that constant hunt for validation or distraction outside ourselves. Scrolling, achieving, buying things. It points inward to a source of peace that's always there.
Yeah, it fundamentally shifts where you're standing, doesn't it? From the shaky ground of the external world to the solid ground of that inner presence.
And Brother Lawrence lived this way consistently for decades.
40 years, the sources say, right up until he died peacefully in 1691.
Wow.
And it's thanks to that small collection, those conversations recorded by Beaufort and the letters, that we even know about it. That's how his simple wisdom got passed down.
It really is like this gift of a way of life available to anyone, isn't it? I mean, a cook, a sandal repairman, someone dealing with chronic pain. It proves that this isn't just for special elevated people. It's for us, ordinary folks in ordinary, sometimes messy lives.
It's a profound reminder, I think, that deep spiritual connection isn't reserved for quiet chapels. It's right here, in the middle of everything.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive for you, let's just quickly hit the main takeaways again. We saw Brother Lawrence's journey from really deep struggle and doubt to this incredible lasting peace.
Right. And the core of it, that radically simple practice of just maintaining a constant loving conversation with God, woven into every single daily task.
Driven by pure love, humble surrender, absolute trust. And that transformative idea that God isn't distant, but always present, closer than we think, just waiting for us to turn our attention.
Yeah, it's a practice that doesn't necessarily change what you do, but profoundly changes how and why you do it.
So here's a final thought from the sources for you to maybe chew on. Brother Lawrence found he was more connected to God amidst the noise and chaos of his kitchen than in times specifically set aside for quiet prayer. Does that challenge your assumptions about where spiritual connection has to happen?
Or this one. He believed God looks at the love in the work, not the size or importance of the task itself. How might thinking about that change the way you look at your own routine, your daily efforts, maybe even the things you don't particularly enjoy doing?
Just something to consider.
We really hope this exploration has given you some valuable nuggets, maybe a fresh lens to look through as you navigate your own busy life.
Definitely explore these ideas more in the source materials you shared with us. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.